listening to Binder. I'm your host, Ray McManus. All right. Well, hello, everybody. It's good to be back. Spring is in the air, and we're getting ever so much closer to being able to enter in the Columbia Museum of Art again. I'm getting really excited about it. Hey, Drew.
Hey, actually, by the time that they hear this, they will be inside or can come inside because this will be airing right after we reopen the galleries and just opened probably about a week ago. So please come in and enjoy the really cool exhibitions we're going to have this year. And if you are from South Carolina, if you live in the area, then you can actually come in for free with free admission, thanks to the Art Bridges Foundation and a wonderful grant we got for the whole summer. So,
Well, that is awesome.
So don't listen to Ray and
No,
come
listen
on
to
in.
me. Listen to Ray. I mean, I'm right in the fact that currently at this moment of the recording, you're not in the museum.
I mess Ray up because I always want him to come in and talk about the future as if it's today.
I know, and I don't know what today is.
Yeah,
so.
well, the future is now, and
All
now we're going to talk about something that I think is really relevant to these exhibitions. Been thinking a lot about abstract art.
Why?
Yeah, good question. No particular reason, except for maybe that we have 2 exhibitions of abstract art on view right now at
That's
the
cool.
museum. You know, one thing I've realized over the years, I mean, I've been working at a museum, an art museum specifically, for 11 years now. And you've been working with this museum for just about as long, if not longer. And one thing I've really noticed over the years is abstract art can be a little polarizing.
Yeah. And, and usually when somebody says that they're thinking about abstract art, if I ask why, is there a particular reason why one is thinking about abstract art? Because I think one of the things that people will wrestle with inevitably is, how is it art?
Yeah.
And yet I happen to love abstract art. I mean, I love the fact that, we've talked about this in so many of our episodes about coming to art, same pieces, but coming to it through different perspectives. And I think no real genre really captures that quite as well as abstract art.
Yeah.
I mean, because you could be standing right there and within that 5 minutes, you can see different perspectives. And really, I think it opens up so many doors to different types of storytelling.
Yeah, I did. And that, like, what a great segue, Ray, because one of the questions I have for you is, I know when you've done the ekphrastic poetry with us, you've leaned towards like working with abstract pieces a lot. Do you think that is easier or more challenging to write when the subject isn't like so obvious, right?
Right. For me, it's easier because I feel like I'm not constrained to what I'm looking at in the image. And, I try to resist persona poems, myself. I mean, it's not saying that they're bad or anything like that. I just don't do them very well.
As someone who doesn't know what that means, can you tell me what a persona poem is?
So like, for instance, if I was looking at a portrait
Yeah.
and I wanted to write a poem on that, one way to do that would be to try to write in the voice of the subject that's in the painting. But I feel like if I'm fully invested in the feeling that art brings and pulls out of me, which I'm going to use as an energy to write whatever poem I want to write, based on some type of conceptual understanding of what I'm looking at. So if I look at something and it's predominantly gray or monochromatic of some sort, that's going to make me feel about things that I don't know, that I would typically associate with that type of color or lack of color.
Yeah.
That feeling is going to generate a story. That story could be something true from my past. It could be something from an imagination, but it's still within the confines of the frame. And I think there's just a depth of field that you can just get into and lose yourself into. And I don't mind losing myself from time to time. If you can find your way back, you're great. But that depth of field, there's no bounds to it. And for some people, I get it. It's completely aggravating. It's like driving into a parking lot and there's not clear lines where you know where to park, and you kind of get freaked out by that a little bit. It's just open space. But I like to stretch my hands, stretch my arms, and see what's out there.
I like that you mentioned that you are kind of approaching like how it makes you feel, right?
Mhm.
Because I think from my perspective, when viewing abstract art, kind of like the best way to go about it is to like really like get in tune with your emotions.
Yeah.
You know, and like I'm saying that in a facetious way, but I'm actually being like pretty genuine about that. I think it is more of an emotional reaction to the
Hmm.
work is like where it really shines, right?
Right.
Like because I can look at a landscape and I can go, oh, there's a bird over there, and oh, there's a cloud here, and a little cottage in the background, and I can like make a very literal like kind of one to one with things that I understand in the world around me. But when it comes to like looking at abstract art, I don't have that, I guess, frame of reference. And so
Hmm.
like where am I going to get a frame of reference for this, right? And I think it is going to come from like my feelings on the
Hmm.
inside, And I think it works best when it can kind of tap into that. And so to get things started today, I've brought you a little game. I'm going to be completely transparent with you, Ray. This is not really a game, nor does it actually have a name, except that it does, and I'm going to come up with it after the fact and put it right here.
Art feels.
Uh, And so now that we all know what the name of the game is, including Ray
Oh
definitely knows
boy.
what the name of this is, playing off of emotion and stuff like that, I was thinking about ink blot tests, right?
Oh dear God.
Yeah, and like so you show somebody something kind of abstract, and you sort of ask them what they see. I'm not going to ask you what you see in these, but I'm going to ask you what do you feel.
Okay.
So I'm going to show you a couple of pieces from the CMA collection,
All right.
and I just want your gut reaction. What do you feel? What does it make you think about? It's all of those kind of things. You're a poet, so this is going to be so easy for you. Uh, Being so in touch with
Do you want
your
me to describe to the audience what I'm looking at,
It'd
or
probably be good.
okay?
I'll give them the title and the artist,
All
and
right.
maybe you can just kind of describe sort of. And then for the record, Ray's not looking at these paintings in person right now. He's looking at some really bad printouts of them off that were cheaply done off of our printer. So he's not getting the full experience either. So you'll be right at home with him as you listen to this later. So, all right. So this very first one is a pretty new acquisition. It's from an artist who's actually from Colombia originally. He's living in, I think, believe in New York now, but it's Osamu Kobayashi. But this painting is called Inner Outer, and so I'm going to show it to you, Ray. Here you go. And how do you feel? How does this make you feel?
Okay. Wow. You got to have a moment. Um, it makes me feel like I'm staring at the heart of an inferno. I don't necessarily think of that like of like structural fires or something like that, but
Yeah.
it makes me think of because there's this blue in the background. Well, yeah, it's in the background, but you only see just various pieces of it. So it'd be sort of like staring deep into the flame at a field or something like that, where the sky is behind it, or maybe an ocean.
I I love that, right? You left me floored. Couldn't even grab my next piece of paper because I was so blown away by that
Poetry.
description. Uh, so this next piece is actually in one of the exhibitions that we'll be talking about today. It's in Let's Have a Talk. This is by Willis Bing Davis, and it's called Ancestral Spirit Dance number 568.
Mm.
I really like this one, actually.
Ooh, yeah, this is wild. I love the colors here. I love the movement down here at the bottom, which
Yeah.
it does feel like you're watching. There is a dance taking place. It reminds me of sort of like when you get a photograph of a downtown area at night, a city at night, where the buildings and everything are in clear focus, but everything else that's moving is blurred or
Oh,
is
yeah.
time lapsed with the streaks and everything around
Like a
it.
long exposure photo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I love the colors in here. It's very vibrant. And so I think probably one of the things that's going to probably would pull me in emotionally and get me to think about it is just so many of the different patterns of movement here. Some of it is very structured and geometrical,
Yeah.
and then some of it is very frantic. But what I love here too is just how these colors overlap and work with each other. And so that would get me probably thinking very much about, a human experience of some sort, of both past and present connection, or even a connection with, sort of natural or even spiritual parts of the world we live in, juxtaposed with the man-made structural parts of the world we live in.
Yeah. This very last one, going in a totally different direction, is by Pat Steer. It's called Small Silver Water Splash. You might remember this
I do
piece,
remember that
Ray.
piece, yeah.
Not only for being on View, but also because one of our poets that we've worked with in the past wrote a piece on it, which we will play here.
Pat Steer, Small Silver Water Splash, 1999. This poem is part of a sequence called Increments because each of the artworks is made up of small pieces. This is called Seethe. What the shoal sees as sleet sweeps in, brisk, precipitate, flash, cataract, silt stirred up, a silver whisperer, tinsel, tapestry, already unraveling.
There's a couple of things that I can recall initially feeling about this particular piece. One of them is the lines that are working in the background very much look like looking at a winter forest and a cloudy day. It's a very dreary feel. The splatter of which, I don't know how much of that I can describe on air that it makes me think about, but there's, but I like the fact that there's a messiness to this.
Yeah.
That I think when, and maybe this is why poets would typically, can lean towards abstract, maybe more so than they can to the more concretized types of themes that you would find in some of the art. Because, I think as poets, we're constantly trying to make order out of chaos. And I think a lot of times with an abstract artist is, maybe doing that or maybe doing the complete opposite of that.
Right.
And there's just so many different directions one can go with it. And I do lean more towards trying to create some order out of things that seem chaotic. But every now and then it feels real good to bring a little chaos into the ordered world. And, and I think, you get a little bit of both in this one particular piece.
Well, I think on that note, we should bring the chaos today. And by that, I mean, let's bring in some other guests and let you talk a little bit more about abstraction. And hopefully by the end of this, it won't be the most abstract podcast we've ever made, but damn near close.
Why stop now?
That's awesome. So our first guest is actually the curator of the exhibitions we were talking about earlier. Her name's Sadé, and I'm going to let her introduce herself to you.
Cool.
Here in just a second. I think she's already at the door. Rap, 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 rap. That is my sound effect for the door being knocked on, but literally she's right outside. So
Cool.
I'm going to go grab her, and we're going to get started here in just a second.
Sounds good.
My name is Sadé Ayorinde, and I am the curator, one of the curators here.
Wow. Okay. So Sadé, welcome.
Thank you.
This is your first time on.
It is.
It's not scary, right?
A little.
A little scary? Okay,
A
we'll
little.
try to fix that. But you're new to the podcast because you're fairly new to the CMA and basically hit the ground running. We'll get to that point in a minute, but I'm sure our listeners would love to know a little bit about you, where you're from, how did you, find your way, and then to how you got here.
Absolutely. I am from Nebraska, originally Lincoln, Nebraska. And I actually started in undergrad as a business major, and then sort of found art history like a lot of people do. I was just trying to fulfill some of my generals and ended up in a art history 102, I believe it was. And I was just sort of overcome by my professor, who was super animated. She was amazing. And it was the part that covered the Italian Renaissance, and then it got into sort of more modern and contemporary sort of global art history. But she was the Renaissance specialist, so she was like talking in Italian, and she was just sort of flying all over the stage. And I just thought, wow, this is far more interesting than accounting and whatever it is that she's doing is what I want to do. Not actually, though, because I was never particularly interested in academia, but I spent a lot of time volunteering and then working at the Sheldon Museum of Art, which is the University of Nebraska's art museum. And that kind of just started me off on this pathway to becoming a curator.
That is so cool. I mean, and first of all, any of our young listeners out there who are thinking of going to college and are complaining about all your general education courses you have to take, this is one of the reasons why we want you to take those general education courses, because you don't know what you want to be when you're going to college,
Exactly.
right? And so it's easy to say, oh, I'm going to go into business. And what kind of business? What do you want to do? And some people might even go that far to thinking, and then they take classes like this. For me, it was an English class. I was going to be an environmental engineer.
Oh, wow. That's a pivot.
Until I realized, okay, I'm basically going to be drilling holes and taking, soil samples all the time. But I was okay with that. Like, it was outdoors, all that.
Yeah.
I took that one English class and I was hooked.
Yep.
So after college?
Yeah, after college, I took a little break and then I returned to get my master's after I sort of realized that being in the business world, I had completed my business degree because it was the practical thing to do. And I'd minored in art history. And then I went out and just did some office work and then decided that I wanted to be more inspired. I was still volunteering at the Sheldon, though, and was doing some filing one day and came across a work by an artist named Kara Walker, who a lot of people hopefully are aware of, and if they're not, then they should be. And I remember it was one of her silhouette scenes, and it was just depicting really sort of stereotypical images of Black people, and I was sort of stunned because when I saw the date as being in the 90s, I thought, this work that reminds me so much of, 19th century imagery was made in the 90s, and I didn't understand why. And I realized that I didn't really have my finger at all on the pulse of like what was happening with Black people and Black communities. I mean, anybody who knows anything about the Midwest, who knows anything about Nebraska, very small Black population. And I didn't spend a lot of time around a lot of other Black people, hadn't my whole life. And I realized that I didn't really understand what was going on with Black communities if this was the kind of work that needed to be produced in that moment. So I thought I need to go back to school to spend time thinking about Kara Walker and her work. And so that's what I did and went back to Nebraska, University of Nebraska for a master's degree. And then I went to Cornell for my PhD.
So you're a doctor?
I am.
We should have started with that, Drew. That's not a title we overlook. Doctor to doctor.
Oh,
we're here. No, nobody cares, right?
No, correct. Correct. No. Least of all me.
It's a joke. I don't care either, right?
Right, totally.
But I do I did love to make my freshman students. I had to remind them of that. Like, look, there's multiple Rays on this campus, but there's only one Dr. McManus. The world can only handle one Dr. McManus. And that was a lie. There's actually two.
Oh.
But the other one's my wife.
Okay, it's fine.
Yeah, so it's all good.
It's fine.
You found your way in, and that just opened the door after the PhD?
So while I was working on both my master's and my PhD, I was finding opportunities to do museum work. So I was working at the Sheldon, and then I did some various curatorial projects at Cornell. And then I was at the American Folk Art Museum in New York City and spent a few years there. And then I was at the Smithsonian American Art Museum on a research fellowship before I came to the CMA.
You've been in some good places.
I have been in some great places.
And you ended up at a good place.
I
so
did.
I mean, so that
keeps rolling. Yeah.
Just keeps rolling. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. So now that you're here, we talk a little bit about this and with our other shows, but I think it'd be good for our folks to know just kind of what does a curator do?
Oh, sure. Really, all of the artwork that you see on the walls, all of the installations, exhibitions, however you want to refer to them, somebody has to come up with those ideas and put it all together. So the finished shows really start with, a curator thinking of some way that they want to frame artwork, either that's in their collection or artwork maybe that they need to get from a loan from another institution. But they're gathering those ideas, they're doing research about those objects, they are collecting, a checklist, we call it, which is the list of works that you want to include, and then, taking that through all of the design, figuring out how you organize these paintings or sculptures or any work of art. What needs to go next to what? Are there going to be sections that sort of dive in a little bit deeper to a larger theme? What are the paint colors that are going to be on the wall that are going to enhance a person's viewing experience? All of those things are part of the curatorial process, and then the art goes up on the wall, and everybody gets to take a look and experience it the way that they want to.
That's so cool. I know that maybe it doesn't seem like that's the coolest, but I think that's the coolest part. I mean, honestly, because what our patrons are going to see is the product, right?
Yes.
And the process is, to me, is fascinating because it is a lot of work.
It is.
I would imagine it's a lot of work just to curate one exhibition.
Yes.
But you're curating two.
I mean, even more than that if you think about the reinstallation project. But yes, and at any given moment, there's what's happening this year, but there's what's happening next year. So at any given moment, there's probably even more than two. But yes, the current shows that are about to go up, there were two that I worked on. Yes.
Yeah, it's never ending,
It's
right?
never ending, yeah.
And that's a good thing.
It is.
That's a good thing. Let's talk about the two that are about to open.
Yeah.
So we've got Sam Gilliam, Printmaker.
Yes.
And then let's have a talk, Black Artists from the CMA collection.
Mhm.
And so let's talk about Sam Gilliam first.
Okay.
So you could tell us about him, about the work they're going to see, and then the other part to that question is, and I love to ask the curators is, what's your favorite piece
in the show?
Yeah, so let's start with Sam first. That's the softball, and
Okay.
then let your brain just kind of work in the background.
Okay. So who was Sam Gilliam? Sam Gilliam was a pioneering abstract artist who was also Black. And he's really responsible for a lot of innovative, creative, thinking around modern art. So he was born in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1933. His family moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And then he grew up there and went to both bachelor's and his master's of fine art in painting at the University of Louisville. He then ended up in D.C. In 1962, he moved to Washington, D.C. and spent the rest of his life working and living there up until he died, which was only a few years ago in 2022. So he's most often associated with a school of artists called the Washington Color School. And they were already established in Washington, D.C. by the time that he arrived. And this group was really, hence their name, color focused. So they were abstract artists, mainly color field painters, who were making these often large scale sort of canvases, like large expanses, flat expanses of color, thinking that there was a lot of importance in the sort of optical and emotional power of hue, color, and form. And I think importantly also too about the way that they were sort of approaching artwork is that this was a response to abstract expressionism, where gesture and mark making and like the artist hand was really visible in a lot of those works. For the Washington Color School, they were really more interested in sort of the absence of the artist hand, a more just pure color focus that would allow people to sort of enter into it on their own without thinking about who the maker was. So Sam Gilliam enters into this world. There's people like Alma Thomas, Paul Reed, Gene Davis, these other artists that he's in conversation with. And he's interested in working in along sort of those same ideological lines of the fact that it should be two-dimensional and flat and color-focused, but also in their techniques, which were namely the sort of process of painting, which was to apply paint to raw canvas by pouring it. So a lot of these artists would dilute the paint that they were working with, and then they could pour it onto the canvas instead of actually applying it with a paintbrush or with their hand. And it would then soak into this raw canvas and create, these beautiful expanses of color. Now, Sam, though, kind of turns this on its head, sort of adding his own flair as any sort of artist is going to want to do. And he starts taking that canvas and folding it or sort of twisting it, crinkling and sort of wrinkling it and then letting it dry. That way, when he would then open it up, it would also add this extra neat texture and like layers and pools of paint that would form. But then perhaps most importantly, he decided to take his canvas off the frame. So people often know him for these drape paintings, what are called drape paintings, which were actually inspired by him seeing sort of clothes on clotheslines.
Right.
He would not sort of stretch his canvas onto a frame, but instead just kind of let it freely sort of drape, hang it in different, sort of different pinpoints of, sort of corners or sections of fabric, and then let it drape along the wall, which created this really interesting moment of like a 3D experience where most of his sort of fellow Washington Color School painters were still thinking very flat 2D. So he was a brilliant sort of innovative artist in that way, following in line, but then making his own exit, making his own way.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, if you think about the artists that truly stand out, to do something that's just not ingrained with the school of thought at that particular time, are the most daring, the most rebellious, and the most inspiring, I think.
100%.
Now, the work though that'll be in this exhibition is going to be a lot of his printmaking, right?
Correct. So while he's most known as being a painter, he also had a sort of very active printmaking practice as well, which was part a way for him to explore new ideas that he might want to try in his paintings, or to sort of transfer some of his painting techniques and styles into print. So he was often playing around between these two mediums, which I think is really, really cool. So he made prints for almost, a good portion of his artistic life. The prints in the show are as early as 1972, and then they go to about 2009, but he was printmaking up until 2022. There are prints with dates from 2022. So he had a long printmaking career.
His approach to that medium, what makes that so unique?
He was so experimental and sort of boundary pushing, with everything that he did. So that same way that I was talking about that as far as his painting, it's the same thing that happens with his prints. So one of the things that I think is really special and particular to his ability to do that, though, is his sort of collaborations. So he went to art school, but he didn't really know that much about printmaking. So when he decided he wanted to start making prints, he sort of sought out other master printers that he could work alongside. And so those collaborations, I think, really helped this experimental and sort of innovative work to sort of, enter into the world, because he was really encouraged by his friends and colleagues to experiment. And, he would come with a vision, they would help him figure out how to realize that vision. They were the ones who really knew a lot of techniques, but then also he would say, well, this is what I'm trying to achieve. This is the texture, this is the color, this is the layering. And then they would have to sort of dig into what they knew and figure out how to make that happen. So he was pushing them, they were pushing him, teaching each other. And so it was really this like marvelous experience that brought about stunning works. The other thing that I think is really interesting and that has led to really unique works is his use of materials and the way he manipulates the print. So he is known, for adding embossing or collaging, or after a print is pulled, adding paint on top of a print to sort of embellish. He will fold and cut different prints apart and then stitch them back together to create something new. And so though it's prints, what's really cool about it is that so much of his work was actually about making unique works, which is what painting is, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is it's a printmaking process, which, we always think of as being reproducible, and in theory they were, but so many of his prints were actually wholly unique, which is very, very cool.
That is cool. All right, so now the tough question. You can only pick one. What's your favorite piece?
So there's a print called After Smoke, which is my favorite because of a couple of things. One, it's got this collage-like effect, but it actually isn't a collage. So it's just, I think it's amazing the way that he and the printer he was working with, Lou Stovall, were able to create this sense that you were looking at layers that you're not actually looking at. So I like it formally, but also I like it because of the story behind it. So Lou Stovall and Gilliam were very close friends and worked together on prints forever. Lou Stovall was an expert in screen print, so the works that they did together were primarily screen print. And most of the works in the show are going to have Lou Stovall's name associated with them. So they were working together in the studio on this print, After Smoke, and they named it After Smoke because apparently they felt like the print, the work that they were doing was just so hot, so like cool, that it left the silk screen smoking. So they called it After Smoke. So I just thought that was really, really cool.
Sadé Ayorinde is the curator for the exhibitions Sam Gilliam, Printmaker, and Let's Have a Talk, Black Artist from the CMA collection. Both on view now at the Columbia Museum of Art until August 31st. More from Sadé after the break. And then
studying art history and then studying about that sort of like time period when abstract art, began. I just love that it was like, no, we're not going to do it the way you want us to do it. It reminds me of the Impressionists. It reminds me of the Fauvists. It reminds me of, all that, where you're just like, nope, going to do it my way. Thank you.
Katie Chandler after this.
Hey y'all, producer Drew here. When the Columbia Museum of Art began 75 years ago, it did more than just open its doors. It created opportunities, sparked conversations, broadened perspectives, and ignited moments of discovery through art. Over the years, we've expanded significantly, moving from the stately house on Senate Street to the iconic building on Main Street. The CMA isn't just a museum. It's a dynamic hub where art comes alive and everyone is invited to join the experience. But we can't do any of this without the support of our community. And a great way to show your support is by becoming a member of the Columbia Museum of Art. Not only will you receive great benefits like museum admission, early registration, and discounts, but your contribution will directly support initiatives at this museum, such as our public access days, educational programs, and so much more. You can learn more about CMA membership at columbiamuseum.org/belong. Help us continue to bring unforgettable creative experiences for all of the residents and visitors of South Carolina to enjoy for the next 75 years and beyond. columbiamuseum.org/belong. And now, back to the show.
So folks can come in and check out Sam Gilliam.
Yes.
And they can also come in and check out Let's Have a Talk, Black Artists from the CMA collection. I want to hear about that one because that's got a lot of different artists in there. And so I imagine putting that together, you had to think about a lot of different things.
Yeah, well, Let's Have a Talk was actually inspired by the Gilliam show and the Gilliams that we have in our collection. So first of all, we have 2 Gilliams in our collection, which people are probably very familiar with if they've been to the museum. However, recently, over the last several years, only one of them has been on view, but both of them went out on conservation. So they're coming back and they'll be nice and fresh and clean. And so we thought it would be good to put them on view so people can take a peek at them. So I already had the print show on one hand and I had these 2 Gilliams on the other hand, and I started thinking about what I might be able to do to sort of continue the conversation visually, so in an abstraction, but also wanting to continue to have conversations around the work by Black artists. Thinking about the fact that Sam Gilliam is the most visible Black artist in this collection, I would say, and perhaps the one that people are the most familiar with. And I realized then that people might also look at the kind of work that he was doing, an abstraction, and think about that as maybe one of the only ways that abstraction might be functioning. And I wanted to show that abstraction is sort of deeply rooted in Black artistic production, but that it shows up in a lot of different ways. I thought people would be able to come out of one show concentrated on Sam Gilliam's style and then walk in to Let's Have a Talk and be able to see a range of different ways that Black makers in this collection, because I think it's important to establish that this is not by any means comprehensive. This is not an examination of the sort of history of Blacks working in abstraction. This is just simply what we had in this collection that I could put on view.
And yeah, and I think that is an important distinction, but I think what's really fascinating about this is that because that is the approach, you end up with an exhibition of so many different things. I
Yes.
mean, so it's not just paintings, right? I
It's not
mean,
just paintings.
it's photographs, it's
Yep.
sculptures. That really helps to see that it's not just a conversation, but many conversations, right?
Exactly.
And that's what I love this kind of aspect. I think, one of the things that we've talked a lot about on this show are the conversations, the stories, the things that can come from, your interaction with art. I will admit I don't understand all the various hues. I don't have the vocabulary for everything, I can't approach it that way, but I can be moved by it. And then I can also be in touch with what it is moving in me. And most of the time, it's just the sheer want to have that conversation.
Absolutely. And I think you're hitting on something that I was really trying to delve into. I mean, it's called Let's Have a Talk because I was hoping for dialogue. And like I said, I think that happens between exhibitions as you sort of walk into a space that's completely different from Sam Gilliam in terms of what's on offer, what abstraction is on offer, but then also between works of art in the galleries. So you have, someone like Oliver Lee Jackson, who is doing beautiful sort of gestural work. It's almost like action painting. You can kind of tell a lot of his probable body movements as you look at the different sorts of way the paint is laid onto the paper. Or you have someone like Carrie Mae Weems, who has a photograph of buildings, but the way that she sort of broken them apart a little bit and sort of cropped the photo makes it seem like you're focused more on form than you are the actual fact that they are buildings. That's abstraction. She's abstracting that image, so it's not your typical landscape in that way. And then you have someone like Merton Simpson, who is playing in a minimalist sort of space. He's got this yellow square. So minimalism was a movement from the 60s and 70s that was really directed toward form, like just the purity of form. And so a lot of these works, though made by artists, looked like sort of mass-produced objects. And they wanted to, again, divorce the artist from the work and have people, viewers, just focus on form and color. Some of them have color. Others of them just focus on the material. So, whatever the color of the steel or whatever the color of the, plastic, whatever the case may be. And so Merton Simpson is like pointing to that with this yellow square that you're able to experience from a distance. But as you get closer, you realize that he's like thrown the personal completely into it because there's like pictures, like there's heads that are floating around this grid inside of this square. And he's known for incorporating bits of himself into his prints, whether it be photographs from his passport or information from his birth certificate or things like that. So now all of a sudden, what it was not meant to be autobiographical, if you're a minimalist, is actually autobiographical. So you have all of these different artists, doing really, really interesting things. Adrian Piper, who is where I got the title, her print is called Let's Talk, but in the print it says Let's Have a Talk. And she's a conceptual artist, and conceptual art is really about the idea, not the aesthetics of the object. And so a lot of time there's text in conceptual works that really challenge you to think about the concept and not the image. And so I wanted to make it clear that just by grabbing a few objects, because relatively 16 is not that many objects, you can see this vastness of different abstract styles. And aside from these artists being Black, I think it's important for people to think about abstraction more broadly than just abstract expressionism or color field, which is the thing that I think people are the most familiar with.
Well, and too, if you had more than 16 pieces, I mean, it's kind of hard to have a talk.
It's true. It's true.
There's a lot going on, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying if you had 17 pieces, we couldn't still have a Let's Talk.
But
if you tried to make it as expansive and tried to cover so much, it would have been much harder.
Yeah, but there's a lot of conversations that are able to bounce between objects on different walls. And then like you were saying, then I want people to be able to have conversations between themselves and the object because again, some people are not that comfortable around abstract works because they can't tell what's going on. But for me, that's the thing that's the coolest is that it's not knowing, it's not having a clear sense of what's going on. Because then, as you were saying, then it starts to generate questions.
Right.
What the hell is
Yep.
happening here, right? Why is this color? Why does that say that? What is that supposed to mean? And, with Let's Have a Talk, like, who am I speaking to? And why are we talking? And what are we talking about?
Where's this conversation going?
Exactly. Because generally, if someone says, let's have a talk, you might have like a sense of where we're going. Maybe you're like, oh, but with this, you don't. So I really want people to tap into whatever discomfort that they may have and come up with personal interpretations and those personal questions or their own feelings, and feel really comfortable putting that onto the artwork, having conversations with other people in the gallery, talking within themselves. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Do you have is there a particular piece that really stands out to you that, dare I say, makes you want to have conversations with more than others?
One of the works that I like the most is the Sanford Biggers quilt piece. It's called Yo-Yo, and I have no idea why it's called Yo-Yo. So already I have all kinds of questions. But what I really love about it, first of all, I'm very excited about quilts. I have done a few other quilt shows and kind of got hooked on them as objects. They're fantastic and really amazing sort of keepers and representation of like history, like
Absolutely.
human production and actual like history, like timelines. Anyway, quilts are fantastic. And so I was already really excited about the piece because it's a quilted piece. But I also like the fact that quilts have sort of more recently been associated with abstract art, like because of the fact that generally they're just color and pattern, right? So
Right.
there have been other art historians and curators who have made, sort of comparisons between quilts and abstraction. So that's there. But then because of the fact that he's clearly cut the quilt, the main quilt apart, he's constructed this almost like pyramid-like object. And so again, you have these sort of blocks, almost like the quilt is broken. So he's further abstracted this object that's already seen maybe as part of a conversation around abstraction. So I think that's fantastic, just visually. And then tied up in it is a lot of sort of history. Biggers has talked about the fact that he's done research that led to him understanding that perhaps during the Underground Railroad, quilts were used as communication devices, that
Yep.
maybe this is not proven, but that maybe they were a way for people to understand. They'd be hung in various places on fences, clotheslines, outside of people's homes, and it would signal places where you should go or places where, people who are on the run shouldn't go or places where they might be safe. And so it has this like African American history that's really beautiful potentially and interesting. I think that work is loaded with a lot of really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, especially given from a Southern perspective, quilts were so utilitarian, right? I mean, it's most of the time put together from other scraps, and were done by hand. I
Yep.
mean, these were not machine made in any way, shape, or form. But then to take that concept and then to tear it apart and build something else out of it,
Yeah.
oh man, there's so many great things you could pull from that.
Mhm.
I guess what has me so enthralled about abstract, and we've been kind of talking about in this show today, is that, the unpredictability of it.
Yes.
And I like that, and I think to your point, this allows us to take avenues that we would not just normally or naturally go to because our day-to-day lives pull us in it almost pulls us into the directions.
Yeah.
And this is going to give us a moment to stop, think, reflect,
Look deeply.
look deeply into ourselves, look
Exactly.
deeply into each other.
Ask questions and, examine, hopefully encounter things that maybe people haven't seen before, in the sense that Black artists working in abstraction have been left out of a lot of art history because people are most comfortable and sort of aware of Black artists working in figuration or having works that maybe tell a more clear story about Black identity. And so while I think oftentimes people can be uncomfortable with abstraction because they don't have anything to latch onto, when you are looking at works by Black makers, there's an extra level perhaps of not understanding or feeling distant from that work. And sometimes that's intentional, but other times it's just about realizing that this is another part of what's going on in art history. And I think part of what I really wanted to do, this is a very small sort of way to sort of update the record and make sure that Black people are visible within all aspects of art, that they're celebrated for their contributions to modern and contemporary art in all ways, not just in limited ways. So I'm trying to be part of telling a more complete story of Black art history.
I am Katie Chandler. I am the Visitor Experience Manager at the Columbia Museum of Art.
So, welcome, Katie, to the show.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. One of the things that we've always tried to do here is get to know the wonderful people that work here at the Columbia Museum of Art. Obviously, there's so much that goes into every aspect of everything in this space. We want our listeners to know about the people here. So what do you do here?
I'm currently the Visitor Experience Manager. So I help out on the day-to-day of like the visitor experience. Essentially, when visitors come into the museum, they're greeted by a visitor experience associate at the welcome desk. So training those staff to, learn about customer service, learn about the museum and its mission, learn about what's happening in our community and all the different programs and events that we offer here at the museum, but then a wider knowledge of like what's happening in like the Main Street district too is important. And I also help with the staff in the galleries. It's really great to help them learn about, the exhibitions that are coming up and also participate in, different lectures and different programs and things like that to be more a part of the community at the museum.
First of all, it's so important, I think, to help folks to get the feel of this place. I think that's one of the things that drew me in very early on to the CMA, was that I never felt like I wasn't welcomed here,
That's good.
But I would say the more I've been involved with, and I'm kind of coming in just to write. I mean, that was my first reason for even coming in here was I was looking for somewhere that was nice and cool. And I could just write, and it was quiet.
In town, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why everybody looks so young here. We figured this out in a few episodes.
Right, the right humidity.
You're right. Everybody just stays preserved.
Right.
But the fact that experience of not walking into an elitist space, not walking into a space where I feel like I should have studied a hell of a lot more art history before I came in here. I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't belong here. Which I think would be obviously anti-mission of the museum.
Yeah.
So
we don't want it to feel like you don't belong. It's supposed to be your art museum, and you should see yourself in the programs, in the events, and reflected in the artwork that's selected for the exhibitions, that's selected for the collection. And I think we're definitely going to see that in the show that's coming up this summer, and then also in the reinstall.
Yeah. The reinstall is, I'm really excited about that.
I can't wait.
I can't wait either. I do want to come back to one thing, and then I want to get into a little. We're going to start talking about some art.
Okay.
But one of the things that I really love about this aspect, and it really appeals to a lot of folks who are coming to the museum for the very first time, and they don't know really how to interact with the pieces, but they don't necessarily know how to act at a museum. They've never been in a space before. I mean, they're rowdy and they're going to come in here, doing crazy stuff, but it wasn't like autobiographical or anything. I've never gone to a museum and done anything crazy. But people might accidentally stand a little too close or, want to take a picture, but they've used flash. But to have someone who can come up and talk to them, and when it's not a security guard coming up and say back up,
exactly.
And not that our security guards ever talk like that,
No.
But they're wonderful, wonderful people. But you feel like, okay, if I made a mistake, it was there's not something punitive that's been added to that because we're learning, and as folks are learning how to do this, that should encourage them to want to come back, and we do want them to come back because you're going to see it differently every single time you come back. And then there's so much stuff that happens here. You couldn't possibly grab all of that in one particular thing. So
Yeah.
good on you and your crew for doing this, for the work it takes to do this, for the passion and the enthusiasm for the job to do this, because ultimately that is what I think, dare I use the word, enhances the experience of the museum. I mean, people who come to look at the art and are going to come to the art museum to look at the art. But those people who are going to come in and they want to, but they don't know how to. And y'all can help guide that.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And it's just gentle, reminders or corrections like, oh, let's take a step back. What do you like about this artwork? We don't want to damage it because it's invaluable. Like, is that the right word? I don't know if that's the right word. Okay.
Yeah. No, it's true.
But yeah, just making it positive. And we have people that come in that have never been to a museum and trying to figure that out. And it's such a cool experience to see, someone that is brand new to the world of, museums and institutions, and then our regular, folks that are coming in. It's nice to be able to meet everyone where they are.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm sure people want to come in and high-five Caitlin and Martin all the time. And
yeah.
Yeah, you can't do that. Guys, you can't do that.
You can't.
Please don't.
Please, yeah, don't.
A lot of this episode, we're talking about abstract art and abstraction. Are you a big fan?
Yes, I am.
Yeah?
I am a lot.
What do you like about abstract art?
I just think it's so cool. I know that that's like a simple way of saying it, but...
and yet we all know what you mean.
Yeah, right? I just find it to be really expressive in ways that are important, because for me personally, I don't always have the right vocabulary to express what I'm thinking or feeling or processing at the time, because I need more time to process. Mm-hmm. And so as someone who's looking at abstract art, there's no right or wrong way to look at it. It's just magical.
Yeah.
It feels so magical.
Yeah, I know. I know. I totally am right there with you. I think that I get why some people want to move away from abstract art. They like the concrete image.
Right.
It reminds them of something, whatever that something is. They can understand what they're looking at. Mm-hmm. Some people just need to know 2 + 2 is 4, and that's it. There's no other question about it and don't want to. And that's fine.
Right.
I mean, we all have different levels of engagement. But like you, I think what happens with abstract art, for me as a poet, is that, first of all, it appeals to my rebellious sensibility, right? The idea of, I want to do it the way I want to do it. And you know that there was great risk involved in doing that. But, because of that, to me, it also exposes a lot of vulnerability. And that makes that artist who created that, it puts them up on a higher shelf for me. And as one who, has grown up in South Carolina his whole life, I lack vocabulary for all sorts of reasons. And so a lot of times my own connection to what I'm looking at is my entry point. And if I'm looking at a picture of, I don't know, the Madonna or something like that, I mean, I'm going to find something to connect it with, but I'm going to be limited in where I'm going to connect. But if it's abstract, I could go anywhere, and can feel anything from it. When I bring students in to talk, and we're getting them to write poems about it, I'm not talking from the historical standpoint. I'm asking them the question, how does this make you feel when you see this line go across this empty space? Or when you see these two colors against each other, what is it? Does it remind you of anything? And I can tell they want me to, like it's a trick question, like you should know what it reminds you of.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're right, there's not a right or wrong.
No.
And I can tell that sometimes that aggravates people, but
It does, yeah.
But I like it.
Yeah, me too.
And I'll admit, I mean, not all abstract art appeals to me. I mean, like not all art appeals to me. Not all music appeals to me, right?
Yeah, same.
And I think that's important for our listeners and our patrons to know that, right? Just, I might like abstract art, doesn't mean I like all abstract art. There'll be some people out there, I'm sure, that will hate the fact that I say, I just don't get Rothko.
I mean, that disturbs me a little bit.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm just kidding. But,
I just don't get it, I should say.
It's okay that you don't get it, though. It's
Exactly.
like it maybe that, his style and his process just doesn't resonate with you for some reason, and that's okay. And it doesn't have to. I mean,
right.
I think the reason why it resonates with me is because when I studied abroad in Italy, I went to London for a weekend, and I think I went to the Rothko Chapel and just cried like so much because it was just overwhelming and beautiful. And I was in a really transitional time in my life because I was my senior year of undergrad, living abroad, didn't really know what I was going to do when I got back, to the States and stuff. And when you're living in a different country, you're learning new customs, you're learning new language, all these things, and you can be really homesick as well as be really excited and happy that you're having a new experience. And so when I sat in that chapel and like looked at those paintings, it felt like all of those feelings combined. So having that experience and then coming, being at the museum and then seeing the Rothko exhibition that we had, and seeing a little bit more of his history and his background, I think that's what interests me a little bit more, is learning about their process and like, what kind of art were you making before you made this whole, collection that everyone is like raving about? What did you do before that? How were you, experimenting with materials? What styles were you into? And he has a sad story, but we won't go there. But it's okay.
Yeah. I mean, you've tipped the needle slightly. Because now I kind of want to know about, because that's something I don't know much about his background.
Yeah.
And so I think you touch on something that's really important, is that when we do have the opportunity to see where our artists are coming from, and, what their journey looks like to the point of what we see that, is so celebrated, it helps us to appreciate and value that journey. It helps us to really appreciate that final product. So, and to this situation with Rothko, maybe that's just it. Maybe I just don't know enough about that. And maybe if I do, then I can understand a little bit more about what's going on, why this is important, the value of it. So, now, Katie, you're an artist.
Yes.
So, and abstract?
Yes, mostly. I like to experiment with lots of different techniques because I used to be an art teacher.
Okay.
Well, I guess I still am, because I am technically a certified K-12 public school art teacher in the state of South Carolina.
I think you're branded or at least trauma bonded now with all art teachers. So you will always be an art teacher.
That can be another podcast for another day. But yeah, and I focus on abstract paintings and prints because it's just so fun. And when I was teaching, I had to focus on, okay, we need to learn with these state standards, and you need to learn the process in Art 1 to get to Art 2 and go to 2D and 3D and take photography, and then take AP art history with me, that sort of thing. So I really focus on experimenting with different materials because I have that background as a visual arts teacher. And when I was teaching, I really tried to push my students in the direction of it's okay to make mistakes, and something really beautiful could come from this mistake. And I would give options, like say we were learning about contour lines. Well, you could do a self-portrait, you could do a still life, or you could draw like a landscape or a cityscape or something like that. We'd practice in our sketchbooks with different materials like watercolor and pen and ink or acrylic paint. And then I would just be like, go, let's see what you can do. And so then they would do it. And some of them really enjoyed that freedom. Some of them were anxious, rightly so,
Yeah.
And I just tried to be encouraging to them about seeing it as a space and a time where where they could focus on just themselves and the process and enjoy it.
And I think why that is so important is they need to see how the process works. And then they need to see how it works for them, right? I mean, because process is an individual thing. Your process, my process, we all have our process. But because the focus so often is on what the final product is, it's too easy to get frustrated, to think, oh, this thing I'm trying, it's not working out. I'm never going to get something that's going to look as good as this. Not realizing that you have to do the other thing that I'm embracing that you said is you got to be willing to take that risk, and not be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
So when you're working on these things, on your work, because I just like to ask artists this, so I'm not asking you this personally, okay? Because I'll get asked when people see my CV or they'll see my publication record, like, man, you've published a lot. And I'm like, yes. And I guarantee you there are 10 times more failed poems and rejections. Has there ever been a piece that you were working on that you put a lot into and you just never could get it there, and it just ultimately just broke your heart? It just failed.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some things that I've made that I'm like, yeah, that's great, and I leave it. But there's been times where I've like overworked something because I just didn't give it space.
Yeah. That's important.
That's important.
Yes.
Yeah, and like when, I've made things that I really, really like and it's just not resonating with anyone, or the thing is I don't know if it is, because it's like the way that we share things now is through social media, and that's just like sharing your highlights, and it's not sharing necessarily like the process and maybe the turmoil within that you might be dealing with. You're talking about poetry a lot, and I read a lot of like poetry, but I'm not like an expert or anything, but I really enjoy Mary Oliver. And I like reading her poems and then taking a snippet from somewhere and like appropriating whatever that essence is from the poem that I'm feeling and thinking and putting that on paper or canvas or whatever, and then taking whatever part after it's done, which it's never really done.
Right. No.
By the way.
Yeah.
But
abandoned.
it's just abandoned and ready to be out in the world. But I'll take like a line and make that the title in this way of like honoring her. I know that sounds really like weird.
It's
maybe
not.
I don't know.
It's reverse ekphrasis is what it is. It's wild, man.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. We do the same thing to artists. We do the exact same thing. We take a snippet. Now we don't physically take it.
Right.
But we take a snippet from the art. We produce something out of it. Usually, sometimes the title is, or something about the title of that piece becomes the title of the poem. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time, maybe not. It's the same concept, right? I mean, to the point that the thing itself that got you going and got you creating, suddenly, I mean, for you, it's still there. But to anybody else, unless you told them, they're not necessarily going to know
about it, yeah.
And I love that, because at some point, because process is individual, sometimes process is personal.
It is really personal. When I've tried to share my process, like say I'm trying to make like an Instagram reel or a video for something, I just don't feel authentic about that, because it's up and down, right? Mm-hmm. With how you're feeling about your creative outlet. Yes. And I struggle with that a lot, because it is a part of my identity, and our identities change so much with the world around us and everything that's going on. It is personal, but it is fun to share it with people too, the right people, I think, that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's it. It's the right people you feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because there are, for a lot of folks in the literary world, it's archival. And so, there'll be places that, Furman, for instance, has a really good archive for South Carolina writers, poets. They want anything and everything, right? They don't care. They'll catalog it. They put it all together. So if somebody wanted to see earlier drafts of poems or books, they could look at my stuff. They could look at Ed Madden. They could look at John Lane, or But there's a part of me that sometimes maybe it's the voice in my head that makes me do other things. I'm just kidding, y'all. I don't have a voice in my head that makes me do other things. But it's Drew.
It's Drew.
It's always producer Drew. That makes me think people don't care about this stuff, But they do. They totally do.
And they want to know, and it's a way to connect. And I think the thing is that it's kind of like that thing that we were talking about students, right? And us, like our experience working with students, and that they feel that there's a right or wrong way to do things. Just like there's not a right or wrong way to look at art. You can look at the tombstone in the chat first and then take the artwork in, or you can look at the art first and then look at the information. It doesn't matter. It's just, are you taking it in? And it's the same way when it comes to the process of making art. And it's okay to share your process. I think, to bring it back to vulnerability, in making abstract art and making any kind of art is like straight up, you're just like, ripping open your brain and your heart and your soul to just like say, this is me and I'm going to put this out here. And I think that's why it is scary to share the process because the fear of being judged by other artists and this competitiveness that like your process needs to be better than the person next to you, which is just a bunch of like it's just not worth it.
When I first started, I would hear more established poets talk about their process, and I'm like, I don't do any of that stuff. I don't wait until there's a full moon and I'll sit out on a dock and then I'll read Milton, and then from that comes the poem. None of that works for me.
Yeah.
It is, I mean, and I'll hear some people say, oh man, I worked on that poem. It took me a year to write that poem. I'm like, why? It took me a week to write
because everyone's just different.
Everybody's different, right?
Yeah.
Now, I've had poems that I've come back to that just it took me a year and still could not get it to where I felt like it needed to be. And I'm sure you've had that experience with pieces as well that, oh, all right, it's been a month. I'm going to try it again. Let's see if I can get back into it.
That's what gesso is for.
Yeah.
I'm going to be real honest with you. There's so many paintings I've just painted over.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, you know what? That style, I tried it and it didn't work for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that poem that you tried, it didn't work for you.
Yeah.
Just use some of those parts and take it and put it into something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, yes, because you're exactly right. There is no right or wrong way. I would tell even my young writers, when it comes to writing, there is no right or wrong. There's only weak or strong. You get out of it what you're willing to put into it. And if you're invested in your process, if you're invested in getting to know what your process is, and willing to be flexible, knowing that your process may not work for the thing that you're trying to do. You might have to try something different. You're right in the sense that when you share that, it is the ultimate mark of vulnerability. Letting people into the inner sanctum, right?
Right.
But it's okay for us to have some moments where, this one's mine, this one's private.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'll talk to y'all about anything, but, you don't get to go in my bedroom and look at all my socks in the drawer and the way I fold them.
That went somewhere better than I thought it was. So
yeah, I cleaned that up real quick.
Thanks.
But I'll talk to you about socks,
Yeah.
And I think there is a limit. As artists, we are opening ourselves up to the world, as you said. We're exposing ourselves to the world. And I think sometimes people are like, cool, then I'll just come in and live there. And it's like, no, you don't get to.
Or share their opinion about things sometimes when you're like, I'm not asking for your opinion right now.
Yeah, that's
like I'm in the middle of this process.
Yeah, see me next week.
Or if you want it to look a certain way, that's called a commission, and this is the price point for commission. Like
that should have been a visual artist.
Yeah,
you don't get commissions. But I do want us before you go, and I swear I could talk to you, Katie. I could talk to you all day.
Me too.
But
so great.
We've got these 2 exhibits.
Yes.
And I would love to hear what you think about them, what excites you about them.
I did not know a lot about Sam Gilliam. And so it's been really fun to take some time, with my staff to learn about him and learn about his art process and where he was from. And I read a little bit. I mean, I'm still learning about him, but I thought it was really cool that when he moved to D.C., he was working as a teacher. And what it did was it created more time for him to have a studio and a studio space because he was creating art probably with his students and then had that schedule of being in education. And I have a similar experience to that. And so that was really cool to read about. But just learning about, he experimented with different processes and painting and printmaking, and especially with the capes, painting and they're not dry and then folding them and letting them dry. I mean, how cool to just do different things and to just listen to not grace, but the spirit of creativity or something. I don't know. It comes to visit you and you either need to be open to it or it's going to go visit someone else with that great idea.
No, I would say I agree with that though, and to that idea of the creative spirit. But for me, they don't leave and go find somebody else. They just stick around and haunt me until it's like, okay, fine.
Honestly, same. I saw some people having some similar ideas and making, paintings, but then it's still there.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you not working right now?
Yep.
Why are you ignoring yourself right now? Why are you not in tune with yourself right now. And it does. It haunts me a lot.
Yeah. And you try to do other things, and it's like the more and more you do other things, it just keeps reminding you should be going back into it, that thing.
Exactly.
And you try to do it in your head while you're doing it. So it's like, okay, oh yeah, I could do this. And before you know it, it's like, then what the hell am I doing? You know?
Why am I not just there doing it?
Why am I not just doing it?
Does it put you in a bad mood?
Yeah, I mean, it will put me in a bad mood. My wife will tell you that she knows, like it's just the demeanor I have, like, you know, and she'll tell me, please go in the office. You need to write.
Yeah.
I know you do. Just go. I got it.
My husband
you know?
will say similar, and friends are like, have you painted recently?
Yeah.
Or like, did you make a print, or have you done anything? Have you put an outfit together? Like, what are you doing? You seem like you're having a bad day. Like,
Right.
you know,
I'm running into furniture.
Yeah,
I'm yelling at the neighbor's cat. I mean, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, it's time for me to sit down.
Yeah. But anyway, I don't know. I what I'm excited about, I guess, to get back to that. I'm sorry I got on a tangent about other things.
The best ones.
But I'm just so excited, and I just can't wait to see Sam Gilliam's work in the new space, and then to see Let's Have a Talk that Sadé has curated. I mean, I just can't wait. She's just so cool. But there's some really interesting pieces in there, like the Sanford Biggers piece that is just in the Beverly Buchanan, and then our two Sam Gilliams that are in the CMA collection. It is just delightful. I think what it is it's fun to be inspired as a visual artist, and to see new work coming in, and to see things and to think, how did he make that, or how did they make that? I guess I need to go home to my studio, and I'm going to need to try some things. And I'm not going to copy this artist, but I'm going to be inspired and try something and experiment and see where it takes me.
Katie Chandler is the visitor experience manager here at the CMA. Not only does she love abstract art, she makes it too. If you'd like to see examples of her work, you can check out her website, katiechandler.art. I think in order for you to really appreciate, and dare I say even enjoy abstract art, you really have to be in the right frame of mind for that. And that might be why I love it so much, because I don't go to it with expectations. And that's ultimately the trick, if there is one. We often, without us even realizing we're doing it, when we look at art, when we talk to people, when we go to places we don't know, when we try new foods, we put our own bias into things. We put our own expectations into things. And when we say we don't like it, it's because it probably didn't reach that expectation. So, the next time I'm looking at Rothko, I'm not going to that with expectations. I'm going to let the work speak to me. Open-minded, open-eyed, and we'll see what happens. You've been listening to Binder, a production of the Columbia Museum of Art. Today's episode was hosted by me, Ray McManus, produced and edited by Drew Barron, with special assistance from Joel Ryan Cook. For more information about CMA exhibitions and programs, visit our website at www.columbiamuseum.org.
Hey y'all, producer Drew coming in here at the end of the podcast with just a little bit of housekeeping. You heard a poetry reading earlier in the podcast. That was Seethe by Natalie Anderson. It was part of our Write Around series that we've done here at the CMA with the help of Ray. You also may have caught that it's free summer at the CMA. We mentioned it a few times on the podcast. That means all South Carolina residents can come free Labor Day to Memorial Day. And that's grant funded. It's brought to you as part of the Art Bridges Access for All program, and we're very appreciative of that. I'm going without a script for this, but I did want to take 1 second just to thank all of our supporters of the museum. As we all know, funding for arts and culture have been a little challenging lately, and it really means the world to us that you're willing to give us your support and help sustain arts and culture for your community. Just so all of you know, next month we may be a little late with the podcast. It may not be coming out until the month after, but we have several episodes in production. We're really excited for y'all to hear them.
and more from us really soon. Until then, come on into the museum. We're excited to have you back, and come see these 2 fantastic exhibitions. They're really worth your time. Thanks so much. See you next time.
Hey, Ray.
Hey, Drew. I don't know what the hell just happened.
It's abstract, Ray.
That's not abstract.
This
That was
is the
weird,
abstraction.
man.
This is the abstraction episode, Ray.
Okay. All right. So now our listeners know that Drew hasn't had a stroke.